the reason why I'm fascinated by conversational AI is that I think it's a really almost an imperative tool to really understand better the user, and with that understanding to actually be able to delineate new journeys that are much more true to what the consumer will need, and really mirror what you actually should build into a car experiential ecosystem. So that's really where I find that fascinating. And where I think it will be really interesting is when we start talking about driverless cars. um,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, of course.
definitely
It
where I
cracks it
think
wide
the
open. Yeah.
conversational AI will change completely, because then you need to be entertained by the vehicle and the experience you have in the vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost like
So
think of it as like trying to feed somebody when their mouth is full. You know, they're driving. You're
mhm.
like, you have to wait for them to like be between bites or something before they can add any other feature. Otherwise, they're eating. Like you can't get the fork in there.
So we have the car makers, we have the technology in terms of behavioral and sensorial technology. The role that AI will play in how the sensorial behavior and the experience inside those driverless car will be really amazing. Because in the end of it, without AI, nothing of that will be absolutely possible. There's no way you could create the best sensorial technology, but without the AI interpretation, you will not be able to control the car as much you wanted to. From a safety
Right.
perspective, neither you will able to give the driver the right experience, because everything will be customized in the fact that instead of purely driving go from point A to point B, I'm actually in this cocoon either by myself or with somebody else, while AI is helping me to driving, helping the vehicle get it to the destination, and at the same time most likely give me generative content that keep coming as I really go to inside this journey.
Welcome back to Invisible Machines. Super excited to be bringing you another great guest episode this week. Rob and I are going to chat with Guido Baratta, a good friend of the show. Guido has been working in design for more than 20 years. He's done digital information systems for Lonza, Philips, and Samsung. He has done product development for Harman, iRobot, and Segway. Guido is currently the Chief Design Officer at Icon Incar, working with brands like Volkswagen, BMW, and Ford on automotive experiences, the increasingly digital experience of being inside of a car. That's what we're going to talk about today. But it's kind of a long and expansive conversation, really, because we start talking about some of the current kind of experience design things that we think about inside a car, and then how AI is starting to turn all that on its head a bit. We even kind of get into broader notions of transportation systems and what a car really is. Seems possible that in the near future, a car might just be one of many robots that you interact with throughout the day. So Guido was actually the first chief design officer at Fjord Accenture. He has done a lot of outreach work through the Humankind Institute that he founded. He is also the founder of Designers United for Ukraine. That is actually how I met Guido in the early days of the horrible war in Ukraine. He was doing what he could to help designers there connect with regular design work, and then also help designers who felt like they needed to leave the country get out. So really excited to bring you this conversation with Guido Baratta. I think you're really going to like it, and we're going to get to it right now. All right. Well, hello, Rob. Hello, Guido. It's great to see both of you. So Guido and I were just kind of talking about kind of experiential design in automotive, and some of the challenges therein, and how conversational AI and ecosystems for hyper automation might kind of fit into all that. I don't know, maybe an easier place to start, and I had asked Guido this earlier too, is what's like a typical day for you, like maybe even like a Friday?
Yeah, it's a great question. Friday are usually a bit calm than the other frenetic day. For some reason, I made little stats recently, and Wednesday and Thursday are the craziest of the days. But usually Friday is the day where people collect all the data, all the info about the client programs, how everything is going, planning for the next week, and there is also the tendency to look at how specific programs are going in a certain direction or the other. So it's a day of I would say of analysis and self-analysis and validation, which is really interesting because in the end of it, we all need that moment of stepping back and look at the week and see how crazy it went and who drive crazy the most and where we're going to be the coming week. That's really, yeah. So that's mostly where happened on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah, self-analysis. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's important to take time for.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
podcasting. Friday's a good day for
Yeah, yeah.
podcasting. So
Absolutely. The Friday is the best day for podcasting, and I'm glad you guys
yeah, catch.
were able to raise up early for me to be here. So I'm really grateful to be here with you guys. So
Yeah.
Happy to have you. You were just describing to me, some of the work that you do with automotive clients tends to be focused on features, individual features within the driving experience, which I think probably adds complexity and difficulty when you're trying to somehow unify those features. And I mean, in an automotive setting, I would assume that each of those features might be attached to its own very complex, isolated set of complicated machinations or whatever. So, how do you tackle when you're thinking about designing an experience in a car? What's your first step? Like, where do you start thinking about that?
that's a very good question. So the I think the problem generally for OEMs and car makers is the fact that they assume that adding new feature or adding just feature numerically, it's already gonna go to attract the eye of the consumer. They do think about the overall ecosystem of the car, but sometimes they just lost the initial proposition why the car was made for and who it was made for. And this has the tendency to provoke a generation of a very large number of features that in many cases, and this will be surprising for the general consumer, have uses cases that don't exist. And you will be very surprised to realize that you think that behind the cars there's a lot of research and a lot of validation, while in many cases the research is fairly diminutive, and there's the tendency to listen to the tech provider, and the tech provider of course tend to trying to put as many features as possible into the grinder. And that become a problem because instead of looking and developing the ecosystem as a whole, which in our cases many time involve a design system, right? Um, in end up to create some kind of monster. I recently had
Like
a
Frankenstein.
CEO that basically, yeah, Frankenstein, like a kind of a morpho figure made of all kinds of different parts and pieces that they don't really make much sense. I had one CEO recently from a car maker in India that told me, like, please do anything you like, but don't do what we did with our last car. And I said, okay, what was the problem? And he said, well, the issue is that everybody wanted to put more, and there are things driver will never look at. The geeks, the tech geeks, wanted to have that in the experience, while the driver wanted to have that cocoon feeling, the feeling he is protected, this experience, that environment, is able to go from one place to the other, is able to travel, to discovery. So yeah, that's a really interesting. Um, I think the reason why I'm fascinated by conversational AI is that I think it's a really almost an imperative tool to really understand better the user, and with that understanding to actually be able to delineate new journeys that are much more true to what the consumer will need, and really, mirror what you actually should build into a car experiential ecosystem. So that's really where I find that fascinating. And the second thing I really love is the notion of being able to create a very specific tailor-made experience inside the car, where the car is basically providing, be the digital twins or the individual that's actually driving it,
on it.
which is also something I think that's not only inevitable, but it's actually very fascinating, from my experience perspective.
Yeah, it seems sort of dangerous almost to think about conversational AI in the context of technologists who want to get their features used. I'm just like imagining the car being, come on, you want to use it? No, just press it. Just try to, come on, come on. Just one, just try
Work
it.
for me. Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
car. Stop asking me.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, when you think of the fact that having different driving modes is now like perfectly, within the experience. Everybody needs an eco mode. Everybody needs a sport mode.
Uh,
If the car is EV, you need a ludicrous or some kind of boost mode. And then there is the notion like, oh, let's create another mode. What that will be? Well, let's call it relax mode.
but,
And so then in the end of it, you're like, sure, I could create the relax mode, but what exactly does it mean?
right.
It would it make me more relaxed? Will it make me less angry?
Right.
That's
Or
that's
fall
a
asleep
really
at the stoplight.
exactly, yeah. To the extent, to your point, Rob, to the extent that at some point they're like, how if you said, put some little happy music or vice versa? I'm like, well, okay, but there is first of all there is a certain set of technology that will involve face recognition, which is pretty simple. It's not nothing too big. But then I imagine me driving the car already sat, and the car tried to make me, pee pee, and like, oh,
How
I'm
annoying
like,
is
no,
that?
it's not gonna work.
I want to be sad.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, exactly. I want to be sad.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But it does get funny when you start thinking that you gotta, take acting classes to operate your car. You're like, you want to listen to sad music? Make your face sad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's definitely the case. Yeah. I I think, I think the space that AI is actually it will take in the creation of those experiences in the future are radically, will change the way we think about cars,
yeah,
radically. So I'm really, really, yeah,
yeah. I mean, your point.
definitely.
Well, it's
Go
interesting.
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it's interesting that a car too is kind of an ideal setting for conversational AI, and
Mhm.
that a conversational interface is really helpful while you're trying to drive. But it's also like a very intimate kind of captive
Yeah,
ecosystem. When you're in the car, you're in there until you get
Yeah,
where you're going, and so
yeah.
that kind of has to be maybe accounted for as
yeah,
well.
yeah. It sounds like that. Your hands are busy, so conversation makes sense. But you should be focused on driving. So anything else that you're doing is a distraction from what you're trying to do and create stress. You know, lo- driving's hard. Driving's complicated for a human. Like you know, most people don't
Y-
want to be distracted when they're driving. Even aside from the all safety issues. So, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and
I'm
Guido's
much.
describing this buffet of features,
yeah,
so You
Yeah, and
know,
I mean,
you
and
have to select
the
between.
buffet, it is distracting. There is just no way. You know what I mean? It's like if I have two buttons in my steering wheel for which I could dose the range of my energy recuperation, I mean, how distracted I could be to
Yeah,
say, well, now I want to break a little less and I want to generate more energy. I mean, we're not there yet where we think that turning the wheel will actually charge our battery. I mean, it
right.
does to a certain extent, but the percentage of that charge is still very little. So in the end of it, yeah, that's one more distraction.
Yeah,
So where I think it will be really interesting is when we start talking about driverless cars. Um,
yeah,
that's
yeah. Of
definitely
course, it
where I
cracks it
think
wide
the
open. Yeah,
conversation AI will change completely because then you need to be entertained by the vehicle and the experience you have in the vehicle.
yeah, yeah. I almost like
So
think of it as
you know,
like trying to feed somebody when their mouth is full. You know, they're driving. You're
mhm.
like, you have to wait for them to like be between bites or something before they can add any other feature. Otherwise, they're eating. Like you can't get the pork in there.
You, I love the metaphor of the fork and the food. It's like I'm eating, leave me alone. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There is this very known Italian character from the book of Camilleri, which is probably one of the few hardware-winning rider Sicilian made. And the main character of his book is a detective called Montalbano, and he always excuses himself when he goes and eat on the table because he said, "I'm sorry, when I eat, I don't talk. So don't get offended, but I need to focus on the dish
Ah,
and what I'm eating. Otherwise, I don't taste the pleasure of the flavor of the food." So it's really
I
interesting.
like that. I like that. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
so
that's a really fascinating too. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so that makes sense. And I definitely what resonates with me is this idea that you have this ecosystem of people and their agendas trying to drive features into a product and wanting that, to be the center stage. I have a similar experience way back when in the days when I was doing post production for feature film. We would do like special effects and sound effects, and somebody would
Hmm.
do like the sound of whatever the horse whinnying in the background, and they like picked. They spent so much time like which not too loud. What kind? It's a racehorse, so we want it to be just perfect. And then it gets to the sound stage, right? And they expect like it to play louder than the actors' voices, because they're so proud of this what they did, right? They think the whole audience that they came to the
Yeah.
movie to hear the horse whinny, not the actors talking, And they're so disappointed when that mixer turns it way
Yeah, of
down on
course.
them. But
Yeah, yeah. They're like, please turn it down. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
why I can barely hear it. Turn it up. Everybody wants to hear this, and they think it's the same idea. Like you spent so much time on this feature, you think the whole world just wants to come
Yeah,
come and experience that feature. But at the end of the day, you need that extra layer that steps back and looks at it through the user's eyes and says, unfortunately, they didn't come to listen to your sound effects. And
yeah. And
Yeah,
and
the horse.
yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, me. I was just going to say the horse's whinny is not an emotional anchor, so we're going to
yeah,
take
yeah,
that.
it's not
But
the focus, right? It's yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it could be, but no,
It could be.
I'm
Yeah,
joking.
no, I mean it
Just
could. Like, what if it was Black Moody?
that's
I
true. Did
love
you work on
horses.
hot?
Like, yeah, exactly. It hooked up. I think I mean, of course, in the last decade, the importance of sound experience as a race, really skyrocketed. But I think what the missing point really is to instead of having just a something that reference you for any kind of demand that you want. It's really, getting into the space where it's like, okay, I want to, I have a specific things I wanted to investigate about or know about or research or discuss, but there is no one in the car with me. Could I entertain, a system, and a system could actually mirror, my own thoughts and, kind of converse to that. That's something that I think OEMs and car makers are starting to investigate, because they realize that, yeah, we have Alexa, and yes, we have all voice command in the car. There is always the battle between the system that's made by the car, the system that's made by, in this case, Android and so on, or Siri per se. But in the end of it, there is the notion that, those systems are getting almost obsolete, because
Yeah.
all they do is they receive a command and they act on your command. So that's where I think there will be a really huge revolution from AI perspective there as well. And there is one more point which is very troubling for the car maker, which is Apple is, try to convince them to use, the iOS for the car system overall. Android is actually working directly with car makers for a while now, and their question mark is how much the experience will come from the car brand and how much the
Uh,
experience will come from, those players. That's a really big question for car makers. And the element of experience that voice, experience phonetically, what the characteristic of the car is going to really fundamentally change.
that's interesting. The idea, yeah, about whether the personality of the interface, the conversational interface, is your assistant that transcends the vehicle to your kitchen, or does the car have its own voice? And are you talking to the car, or is it
Yeah.
both? Is it the car has a personality and a voice, and now there's always three people in the car at any given time: your personal assistant, the car, and you.
Yeah, but that's a really fascinating, kind of, if you frame it, that's a super fascinating instance. It's like, okay, now it's the three of us. I have Siri here, or, in many cases, Alexa. Then I have my personal, car personality,
Yeah,
and then that's me. And I think we may end up giving the driver the ability to switch those personality, because in the end of it, I think the notion of having different modes, the driving modes, really will probably end up to say, well, okay, if those are specific to that experience and you are more likely to drive in eco mode, then it will have a type of personality. If you like to push the accelerator and drive fast, it will have a different personality. So
yeah,
the adaptation of how those conversations are, to be made, it could be really interesting. But I also think that in something that's very particular to EV vehicles is the fact that you're using energy, not fuel.
really.
And the way you're using the energy, the way you're recuperating the energy, where you're getting the new energy, um, how much of the energy relate to your driving style. I think that's also something that's gonna, change quite a bit in the experience, because in the end of it, you used to drive, just put fuel in it and
And go,
go.
yeah,
And with the EV, yeah, with the EV, there's a little more intimate, relationship with how you drive and the reaction that the car gives you in general. So that's quite interesting there too.
yeah, yeah. Car personalities are interesting. My vote is for the feature where the car's voice starts singing along with the radio along with you. It's like a three-way. The key. It's gotta be
That's
slightly out of key.
that's That's pretty. I thinking of an MMM car that sing with you and rap with you,
Yeah,
and you just like
Yeah.
and actually can make it can make your own words on the rap song.
there
That
you
could be
go.
really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty funny. That is funny. But
The
you
car
know,
sings the harmony
Yeah.
parts.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the car sing the harmony, and
Make you the
you rock
star.
with the car sound. Yeah, that's interesting. But the reason I was thinking about driverless car is that, there are, of course, AI and cars is taking, is going much, much deeper. And I think the interesting about driverless car is the fact that when you know driving, you most likely don't own the car,
Ah,
and so the notion of mixing the opportunity that AI create into the experience, and the fact that you're going from a model of ownership of the car to a model of mobility as a service, it's also really fascinating. I mean, there is some, the talk about Mobi AI or Mobileye, all those companies that are trying to create a specific, market segment where from the ownership, you shift the ownership into a completely different model, and you actually leaving the car and without necessarily driving it. Um, I think I look at some of the recent data, and it's quite amazing how much of the driverless car will have in, let's say, in 2030, and even sooner. I think the biggest difference is that US have larger roads,
yeah.
so in terms of safety, it's more prone to that, versus Europe have much smaller road, many obstacles, and much more complex, kind of viability and feasibility of the systems. But one of the things I realized is that, so we have the car makers, we have the technology in terms of behavioral and sensorial technology. The role that AI will play in how the sensorial behavior and the experience inside those driverless car will be really amazing. Because in the end of it, without AI, nothing of that will be absolutely possible. There's no way you could create the best sensorial technology, but without the AI interpretation, you will not be able to control the car as much you wanted to. From a safety
Right.
perspective, neither you will able to give the driver the right experience, because everything will be customized in the fact that instead of purely driving and go from point A to point B, I'm actually in this cocoon, either by myself or with somebody else, while AI is helping me to drive in, helping the vehicle get it to the destination, and at the same time most likely give me generative content that keep coming as I really go inside this journey. So the two components are really fascinating, because in the end of it, it's not just about speed and obstacle control and safety, but it's also about, like, okay, what I'm gonna do when I'm in the car, who I interact to, what I wanted to learn, what I wanted to discover. I think that's also really interesting. We have two clients which we are beginning to have that conversation from an experience point of view, but it's very, very,
Oh,
I would say it's a very early stage.
yeah. I used to
Yeah.
put up this photo. This was like 7 years ago, but um, it's a guy in a car making sushi, and I was like the future of Uber drivers. Do you want the sushi car or do you want the Italian food car? Because you just got off an airplane and you're probably hungry, and he's just sitting there chopping up sushi.
That's pretty
You're
funny.
like the bandana, and he's like, yeah.
That's pretty funny. The image is pretty cool too. Yeah, so that's pretty funny. Yeah, cars are definitely going, before you joined, Rob, we were talking about the fact that at the end of it, the day, when we start seeing LCD, screen inside the car instead of the usual cluster, we all thought like, oh my god, this is so cool. Now, if you look at a variant of those cars and even the modes, the driving modes, the different experience and so on, they're very similar.
Yeah.
So at this point, the again, it's kind of similar to the features thing where you're saying, yeah, okay, this is great, but so what, and even the exterior and the interior car is becoming so similar one or the other that at the end of it, the difference will only be in the experience in the
Right.
ecosystem that the car could create around you.
Yeah. Which it always does. It's not a difference of technology and features, it's experience now. And it's how well you put those
Yeah,
features together and how well you expose them and how elegantly the whole thing works as an ecosystem, like you said. So it seems like that is the next step, is to think holistically and and
yeah,
not just have all these vendors pitching features, but having, some 360 view of the whole experience and how these features sequence together and work together, and what's the interface
yeah.
for all those features, so I'm not pogo sticking between. I know we're still doing that. Like, how do I open the glove box now? Is it under this menu or that menu or
Yeah,
and why they call it glove
yeah,
box? I don't even
definitely.
Well,
know.
you mentioned,
Yeah.
yeah, we aren't wearing a lot
Yeah.
of gloves. Driving gloves aren't really a huge thing. Guido, you mentioned too, like Apple pushing to be maybe like a dominant auto iOS system or OS system. Uh, but if you had a brand like BMW, does that represent kind of a conflict for them? Because even though Apple is kind of a high end experience, like part of BMW is an experience too. They're selling a car, they're also selling an experience. Like, how do
Yeah.
they, like, do they see that as a threat because they want whatever that onboard experience is on the touchscreen or conversationally to be somehow stamped BMW?
Actually, it's kind of spooky that we talk BMW because we're one of the few OEMs that initially refuse to even put the Apple CarPlay in the
Mm.
car. They changed their mind because, of course, from a user perspective, it would be silly to don't have anything like that. But it is probably the biggest conflict among the experience maker and the car maker, because in the end of it, many saw the excuse of Apple trying to design their own car
Yeah.
to actually wanted to design an ecosystem for the car, so they can actually, uh, basically change the way the car experience is being made by the car maker versus made by Apple. This, of course, is related to the fact that if I'm an iPhone or a MacBook user, if I go into a car and I use in the same environment with the same behavioral and the same instances and uses cases, of course, is a super great advantage. What it does to the experience, though, is that it has this extreme simplification, especially in the case of Apple. So it's very minimal. They presented it recently on how this will look, in tomorrow generation. It's actually quite beautiful, but it's extremely minimal. It does have any connection or any characteristic that the car brand will have. So the biggest dangers for OEMs today is how we balancing our own brand and our own look and feel with something like that. Because in the entirety of the Apple experience, you actually see the circular cluster, the telltales, everything is there. So in the end of it, it's like if I end up using that, then the notion of driving BMW or drive an AMG or any of those car brand, that would not make any difference to me, because in the end of it, I'm experienced, sensorially and visually, yeah, of course, but from an experiential perspective, I could drive any car with the same look and feel.
Right.
Android is somewhat doing the same, of course, with Google and Android Auto. They probably are a bit more advanced in terms of technology. So much, in fact, that there are collaboration by two different, very different car makers, which in this case are Ford and BMW. Volkswagen, and in which they actually are making vehicle together. They're developing vehicle together using Android Auto to be the engine that propel the experience. But they're doing this at their own risk because they know that to some extent they're trying to mix the experience that come from the brand with the experience of Apple. And actually, Ford recently hired one Apple leadership person and one Google leadership person in the recent year, and it's really trying to add them in a mix platform where it will depend on the technology, the software you end up using to create that car experience. But they looking this is the first time I think both car makers are looking for design leaders outside of the automotive industry, and they're picking leaders that come from the experience side of things because they believe that it's in their cards, it's in their future to enable those experience to be much more the choosing point. The consumer will use to decide which car will drive tomorrow. This will, of course, will reduce customization, would align the look and feel of different cars and different type of cars altogether. We've seen that already with the mix between, let's say, things like the Fiesta and the Broncos and the F-150 electric. They're already trying to create a system that's much more comparable, has a much more similarity. But yeah, that I would say both companies are the biggest threat to the car maker that are trying to create their own experience. So the bigger question is, are we going to spend all this money to create this experience, or we should just give up and follow those external organization to bring their experience inside the car? It's a big question for them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I I also imagine it's got to be on the table, the idea of the car experience transcending being in the car. You know, I
Yeah.
having an app and your car being external, and so now we communicate with our car even when we're not in our car, and that may seem subtle to people, but I think it's a big deal, to have your car present when it's not present. And maybe it's just climate, maybe it's just checking the surroundings of your car, maybe it's alarms. I mean, but where our car is coming with us in a sense, it's in our pocket as well as in its parking space,
Yeah.
and that seems like it offers up other opportunities as well, in that you're not eating, your mouth's not full, right? So there's other things you can do when you're not in your car with your car. But yeah, it does beg the question: when does the car maker experience end? And and when what are the boundaries of that? Given that my car is as American, it's such a big part of our lives, and now it follows
Yeah.
us around and talks to us when we're not near it. It's kind of interesting where those boundaries begin and end.
It's funny to think that a car could kind of become one of the first digital twins that people interact with in a way.
Right.
And Guido, you were talking about the planning, like needing more planning when you're driving an electric vehicle. I mean, if your car could tell you right before you're getting ready to go to bed that you forgot to plug it in, it could save your morning.
Yeah, and actually, there are some cases in which the EV change, the change into electric propulsion, I brought a lot of those different instances to the place. There are cases in which in if I live in a, let's say, in a family of five, and I drive by BMW and I don't have a key but I have an app, I can ask my dad to transfer the car to me, and the car will actually switch the entire experience to my profile,
Yeah.
which means it will switch, and instead of saying hello John, it will say hello Guido. And then we'll visualize the experience as I left it the last time I drove the car, and we'll have a set of features and customization that relate only and only to me. But there's also cases in which I could leave the car in a specific place, lock it with the app, leave the car, and then I could go and get the car and get it, go and drive it. In as long as I am added to the app, to the car ecosystem. Um, but this is where it gets interesting, where the car could actually speak to you in terms of like, I know I'm still have a lot of charge, but based on the destination you want to reach, I will not be able to get there. And here are the three charging stations that I think you will probably find on your way. And by the way, two of them are very busy. So yes, you can go to the third one. It has less car attached to the charging station now, and your timing there will be 32 minutes and 15 seconds. So this will give you a delay on your final destination of 1 hour. Do you want me to call those people and tell them that you will be late? So you see the experiential kind of platform started to expand from a pure sense of like, okay, I need to be charged, to like, okay, what will that be the consequence into your life? How that life of your day will change based on those consequences of it. And in the end of it, what's interesting is that if you think of the car as that cocoon, as Rob was explaining before, and the car can start be almost the center of all your activity, then in the end of it, there is this, it's almost this bond where you're saying, well, okay, I don't need to worry about all those things because the car will take care of it. And even if I'm late, the car itself will send an email to so and so or make a call, and not even me, she will say, hey, I'm so and so car is driving a bit late, would you mind moving the meeting for 20 minutes? Or doctor, I'm really sorry, I'm so and so BMW and I'm driving your patient there, he will be 20 minutes late. And as we say before, instead of thinking of doing those things, I can focus on the drive, the traffic, what's going on in front of me. So it relieved me of all the other, preoccupation that I have. Yeah, that's really where I think AI will come to place, because how we interpreted those demands and how we measure the extent of the action we want to activate based on the user desire, the driver desire, that's only AI could solve this.
Yeah. It's
So
almost a
and that's what
transformation. Just
yeah,
the
it's huge
transformation from
transformation.
like the car to the chauffeur. Like your car is becoming your chauffeur, and
Hmm.
and now you're just saying to the chauffeur, take me here, take me there. Oh, can you run in and grab my dry cleaning? Oh, can you drop off my like it's the car is no longer the car and it's the chauffeur, and we're all, you know, sort of rising to the level of having personal chauffeurs. And and now, wow, what can your chauffeur do? It can call ahead and say you're going to be late to a meeting. It
Yep.
can it can do, oh, my chauffeur will be picking up the kids today. So it really is kind of a movement
Yeah.
to to this chauffeur kind of idea.
Yeah. And I mean, it could also be maybe it's one more of you. Maybe that's your digital twins more than the chauffeur. So he end up, the more he knows about the destination you take in, the road you take, the way you warm up the car in the morning, or not, or cool it down if it's too hot outside, or so on. The more that digital twins will be able to interpret it, you in and create proposition. Say, hey, usually stop here for coffee. Do you want to stop today? I will make sure I spend less energy and save batteries. It's like, okay, that's great. So that's really interesting how those will change the way we look at cars, and how we choose them to many extent.
Yeah,
So
exciting, super exciting.
Yeah, it was interesting thinking of that idea too, like having sort of a personalized. I guess it is a digital twin that moves from your house to your car and things. But I wonder if we were talking about luxury, like maybe there's, the premium model of that digital twin might suggest that you go to the nice coffee shop you go to, but the more budget model might have ads from Starbucks trying to guide you different ways, like kind of how
car
Netflix
ownership.
now has a
yeah,
plan with ads.
I mean,
Yeah,
it could also be, directly connected to the bank account, and basically saying, I think today we're going to Starbucks instead of going
Yeah,
the luxury
yeah.
coffee shop you use. It could be that.
or
So
your doctor.
yeah, exactly. It's like
Hmm.
you probably should just skip that bottle of wine you just buy into that.
Yeah.
Things of that sort. Yeah,
My the weight sensors, the weight sensors in your seat are
yeah.
detecting that you put on some weight. Maybe you should make a doctor's appointment.
Well, actually, talking about seats, so we are working with two automakers because we developed what we call it the Voucher seat. So the Voucher seat is basically a seat that has all kinds of different sensors around the construction of the seats, and they work both ways. They sense your movement, your comfort or discomfort, and they could, again, propose to an iron engine how do you want me to move the seat back or down, or make you more comfortable. But they also could create different sounds of vibration that are related to dangers, change of direction, obstacle. So let's say when you need to turn left and you are distracted, the seat vibrate and say, "Hey, watch out! You have to turn left here." So we developed that butcher seat actually in house. The first prototype was built in the office in Berlin, and now we are going to export it to a center in Chennai, because while we're working on the experience for Mahindra, they all of a sudden visit the office and say, "What is this?" And we say, that's kind of a crazy idea." And they say, "Oh, we want it, we need it." So now we have to reconstruct it, and it feels simple, but it's basically this seat with all those cables and all those
Right.
computers out. I think the issue at the moment for car makers is that semiconductors are scarce. The computing capacity of cars still not as much as we actually wanted to, but yeah, we're going definitely, like, the car interior will become much more sensorial from
Mhm.
an experience perspective in the future. So yeah, so it's cool. Yeah, it was a crazy idea made by a couple of guys, and now it's just turning into some pretty amazing stuff that we're trying to do. So it's fun.
Yeah, that.
I love that you mentioned those haptic cues too.
Yeah,
That's something that we talk about in the book. That
yeah,
conversational AI it goes
Word. Yeah.
beyond speech and text, and it can
yeah,
have pictures, haptic cues, all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff.
Sound effects.
yeah. I
Visual
Like,
love that.
cues.
I love that aspect of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sound effects.
Sorry, Rob. Yeah.
Oh, that was all. Just sound
Yeah.
effects, and yeah, it just
Yeah, a horse's whinny.
yeah,
Make that horse whinny
exactly.
louder,
A
please.
horse is whinny. That's
You have no idea how many times we recorded that. We we
Yes,
really
like
need to showcase that
100
horse
right.
noise.
times. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's like plane of bobbies going around with the horse winding. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
There
there's
is
cameras
this.
in the cars that can recognize horses, so
Yeah,
we could just reproduce that.
Yeah.
talking about sound, there is this gorgeous movie that Wim Wenders made. It's called Lisbon Story. It's a movie I think he won a Cannes in the 90s, so it's not a movie at this point. But the story it's related to this guy that to come back home from a working trip. He makes sounds for movies, and all of a sudden he found the postcard of director that basically saying, hey, pick up your stuff and come to Lisbon because I'm making a movie, I need your sound. And he packed the car with some of the most incredible stuff to make sounds, like buckets and stones and
Ah,
water and all kinds of crap. And it's funny how in the end of it, he get to Lisbon and he doesn't find the director. The director all of a sudden is missing, but he find the film on a montage table on a clipping table. He watch it and he goes out and make the sounds,
oh
and it's really amazing the stuff that he used to make sound. I was thinking about the horse whinny, and it's like the stuff that he makes is
yeah,
pretty outrageous. So
yeah.
so it's cool.
The plunger for your toilet, and you just wrap it with leather, and you clappity clap, clippity clap. Yeah, all that Foley stuff is hilarious.
That's pretty funny. Yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly what it does, pretty much. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's cool.
Well, Guido, we talked briefly earlier too about self-driving cars, which Rob, maybe you want to speak to this, but that's been one of our favorite analogies for kind of describing what an ecosystem for hyperautomation really is, like the self-driving car
Yeah,
analogy.
Hmm.
That if you can have this ecosystem of all these different technologies being sequenced together to drive a car, which is insanely complicated, and then that system can also get better over time, can learn, can react to things differently. That is, in a nutshell, what we talk about when we're talking about hyperautomation as well.
Yeah,
yeah. Cars are complex.
I just wanted to say
Yeah.
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it's a very complex but very fascinating because again, I think that we are if you're thinking of okay, the level of automation in a self-driving car is different level. Level 5 is like okay, the car pretty much do
Yeah,
it all. Um, I think the percentage on the car that currently could achieve level 5, it's fairly minor. But when you look at statistic data, it's mind-boggling.
yeah,
The fact that you could go to work and do all kinds of things without even touching the wheel of the car and
yeah,
doing other things while the car is driving for you. Yeah, that's an
yeah.
amazing proposition.
I think
So
what surprises me is most people miss. I think they compartmentalize it. They think, oh, great, a self-driving car means you know, I don't need to pay attention to where I'm going, but they don't understand that that achievement
yeah,
unlocks so many other things way outside the car, from vision to, decision making. And, when a machine can drive, it can do so many other things, less sophisticated as well. And the implications of all of those other things, is to
yeah,
me far more exciting than just the car driving itself. It's like you said, car ownership is in question. Um, what kind of car I'm going to drive to work could be like, what kind of shoes am I going to wear? Oh, I feel like, you know, driving the Skoda today. And then that's what picks you up. And is it the color I want? No, I changed my mind. I want another color. But then now that something can see, it can, it can do all kinds of other things. It can alert to a crime going on on the way to work, and that changes the criminal system because cars recognize ongoing crimes, and the list just goes on and on and on. Once we've achieved that, um, it's going to transcend cars very, very quickly. I think this is why Tesla is such a interesting company in terms of being going from cars to robots, and we start to see like, yeah, if you can drive a car, a robot can see, and if a robot can see, it can do many other things. And now a car is just another robot. It's not a car anymore. And car culture, obviously is it's got to reinvent itself. But if a car is just a robot with wheels, and we live in a world of robots, then it's just one of our robots, and it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me is that there is a real sense of democratization of mobility, right? Because in the end of it, we most likely to use very similar robots, and the robots are most likely to have very similar functions. And so the notion of it's a fancy or not fancy, will have this feature, not the other feature, will could the robo hire my pants while I'm going on the
Right.
way? Possibly. But but those differences will get smaller and smaller, like thinner and thinner and thinner. And the essence is to control where I'm going, make sure that that journey is actually safer, shorter, more effective from a consumption perspective, comfortable. But you're right. You basically don't think about those vehicles as cars anymore, and you really transcending the figure of the car into a much broader and probably much more efficient mobility system. Because in the end of it, we always forgot that humans are not very the best. There
Yeah.
are few that drive very well,
Yes.
but in the end of it, we're not that great of
In
drivers.
spite
And
of what we
so,
think, 85%
in
of drivers think they're above average. Which,
exactly,
as a
yeah,
math
yeah, yeah.
person, it
Most
always makes me scratch my head.
I, I mean, including those myself as well. But if you're thinking that all of a sudden all this vehicle system is optimized and they can optimize themselves, so they know when another vehicle is in their proximity, they decide, which one has the way and take one direction or the other. They probably, in many cases, safer than what human ability, from a sensorial perspective is, and they also has the ability to create a series of proposition that are my own proposition that could be custom made to my needs
Okay.
while I'm going on the way. And the more the system grow and adapt to itself, the more information and data is being generated, and the more intelligent the system will actually become.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's amazing. That is just they're just mind-boggling. And yeah, I mean, we talk a language, Josh. I'm a petrol head. I'm Italian. I mean, for me, the smell of oil and gasoline, it's like something that remind me, my childhood. But if you think about a system that could, within itself, really reorganize all that
Yeah.
grid, reorganize all that ecosystem as a whole, that is what fascinated me the most.
Yeah.
In the end of it, and in Rob, you said something that's really interesting, like lessen the factor of ownership, but the fact that I don't need to own the car will also democratize
Right.
how we move, and democratize, like, okay, there's really no difference between you and me. We both get into more or less the same robot,
Yeah.
which we don't own. We either our company or ourselves, we pay for it, and then we go and we go on with our life. That's quite
Yeah.
amazing.
I was thinking
To
about
have
this.
that effect.
I was thinking about this the other day. These attachments we have, and how it gets in the way of adoption of new technology like self-driving. A lot of people just very much so against it. and almost just emotionally against it. And I noticed with Tesla they have this, in order to get in the beta program, you had to have your driving skills evaluated by the car, and it gave you a score. And I remember, thinking how uncomfortable that made me. I was like, on one hand, I think I'm a great driver. On the other hand, I don't want to be measured, right? And so I was like, maybe that's what it's going to take here is that if we can show people that they're very optimistic about how good they are as drivers, um, and reflect and point out that they're not as good as they think they are, um, perhaps that might usher us a little bit closer to embracing the idea of a car being better at driving than we are. That overestimation of ourselves seems to be a problem because it's an illusion that we're a lot better at this than we actually are. We think we are anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also it could be really interesting to actually see the car, telling us, look, you see, I took that curve really well.
Yeah.
Would you do the same? Probably.
Yeah.
And kind of, kind of have a little wink, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm taking you to work. And
Yeah.
sorry, but in the
This is how you
rain,
make a left turn,
right?
buddy.
Yeah, it's like there's no way you're gonna beat this, buddy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love that kind of like, okay, now the vehicle has an attitude
Yeah.
while it's still driving and it's providing me with everything I need. Yeah, it become much more fun. It become part of my, giggle in life. Talk about the music for be happy.
Yeah.
When I get those small distraction out of my life, and those are distraction in which I engage, that's also really beneficial for
Yeah.
me to feel better and go on my business. So yeah,
Yeah, it's a funny thing to think
yeah,
like,
That
the
that
cars, whenever you put it in self-driving mode, everybody immediately goes into, oh, it did that wrong, or it's doing that wrong, or it's too close to that. It just seemed like revenge for the car. Okay, you can play at that game. Now I'll evaluate your driving. We'll see how well you do.
yeah, exactly. Let's do how you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or even get so intimate that you get into the car and you have a certain face, and the car immediately said, "Oh, you had another fight. Oh, come on." It's like, let's go. Don't worry about it. I take you to work, and you're like, "Damn, the car." So it's like
Yeah,
it could
running late
create a bit
again.
of a God damn it, right again, right again. You know me? Yeah. Let's get that Negroni at that bar. Don't worry, everything's gonna be fine. It's like, all right, let's go for it. So yeah.
Yeah.
well, the idea of like ownership has come up a couple times. Do you see car companies, are they thinking in terms of a future where owning a car isn't as much of like an individual, there's not as much of a burning desire. Like my teenage sons seem fairly disinterested in getting their driver's licenses. They're not really racing
Yeah.
towards it. Whereas, when I was younger, that was a really important thing to have. But in a scenario where you can just call any car to come get you,
Yeah.
but maybe you pick the brand of car based on what that experience is going to be like. Is that something, do you think that they're thinking about? Like
Yeah,
marketing
they're think,
choose.
yeah, they're thinking about, and they're thinking about from mostly a financial model perspective, because in the end of it, if you look at, let's take for instance two countries like Germany and the Netherlands, ownership of cars, it's at one of the lowest percentage. Most of the car in both Germany and Netherlands, and France also, they become lease car. So you don't own them, you lease them. At the end of the lease, you give them back. They give you a new model. You get the chance to drive another spanky car. The lease payment are becoming almost half of the payment of a financial loan.
Yeah.
But of course, you don't own the car, so you automate a payment. But in the end of it, you don't build any equity. Okay, but the sense of equity on a car is also changing because in those days, as soon as you move the car away from the car lot from a new car perspective, the depreciation percentage is just unbelievable. And so in the end of it, it's not like a house that you could say, well, okay, build an equity and the equity will increase. There's no chance. It's a decreasing factor by many, many fold. So that sense of not the ability of having the immediate ownership, it's really, it's effective how people choose the cars. I think a lot of car makers are trying to figure out what they could do and how they could face, kind of this new era of, known ownership of cars. And the number of brands that are creating specific programs designed not for ownership but for driving and really using the brand as a mobility service are increased. Two example are that come in mind. There's one that come from Geely, which is a Chinese company that is basically building a very large series of cars, including Volvo. They initially tested the non-ownership model with a car with brand called Lynk & Co. It's basically Volvo X40 hybrid, so it has combustion engine but can also go electric for quite a while. And they tested both in the Netherlands and in Germany. You pay a monthly fee. You have no maintenance, nothing. You leave the car, anytime, and give it back anytime. Not only that, but you could actually use the car to rent it to somebody else, which means that if I am at home and I'm not using the car and somebody else has the same app, I could say, "Hey, can I rent your car?" And you take in that intro it, and you just you put it towards the monthly payment that you have for the car. In Amsterdam, the program became very popular for two reasons. One is there are very limited parking space for combustion engine,
Wow.
and the only way you park in the center is if you have a car that has a plug. So now you don't own a car, but the car has a plug. You could go and park it in an electric spot, which most likely will be, available for you. And in the end of it, while I'm at the office, there's one more guy walking in the street. He needs a car to move a dishwashers or any. He rents a car from you. He bring it back in the same spot, and he pays you. And so again, they took some data and they decided to actually expand the program to a Volvo brand, which is doing pretty much the same, and they call it the subscription.
Yeah.
They basically saying you don't own the car, but the car will never break down because we're gonna bring you a new one, and we'll fix anything that goes wrong, and you could easily rent it to
Yeah.
anybody else you want. Yeah, it's quite successful. Um, Other brands are thinking about it. One thing that I wanted to mention is that usually we think of car makers as the most prone to new technology, new models. Most of the time, they are quite conservative. They have a lot of chassis and engine in their
Right.
warehouse, and they needed to try and to get rid of it. But there's definitely they all have the expectation that this will happen sooner or later, so they all investigate a similar model too, because again, I pay one fee, and those are FD payment. But again, if I let somebody else use the car and charge, that payment will get
Right.
reduced, and so the car, even if the guy break the car, they bring another
Yeah.
car. So it's not viewed as I'm driving a beautiful car and it's mine. It's more about, I drive anywhere, I could service this anytime,
Yeah.
and so on. This as a dependency that is coming also from what government and city are planning to do. The three countries that have the most advanced program towards reducing combustion engine utilization are probably the Netherlands, Norway, Finland, and Germany. Um, I think Norway is probably the top player, where they're basically saying no combustion engine after 2025 in the whole country. The Netherlands is doing quite the same. Amsterdam should be combustion free on 2025, and there is already what they call it the limiting zone, where some combustion engines are older than a certain age are not permitted in any cases to come to the center of the
Right.
town. So this is provoking the car maker to say, okay, we need an answer to this, because in the end of it, if we're not going to be able to produce a new model, people will not need a car.
Right.
Many of the people that I know here in Berlin and in Munich, they don't own a car. They call it Uber. They could go
Yeah.
anywhere. They get onto a bike. They get into a train station. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
this is uh, it's not alarming to them, but it's definitely something that they wanted to get a grip of.
Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah.
Something like I look at the like sort of call it the Uber Black effect, which is when Uber first came out, it was mainly black cars, and people could just book a black car and be dropped off at a restaurant in a black car, and they could look successful. Um, and so that was kind of like the kickoff is, so look at me in my black car with my chauffeur, and then over time now, if you get dropped off in a black car, people almost frown on you, almost embarrassing. Like, why did you pay 3 times as much for a ride? That makes no sense. And I think it's the same idea. Like luxury just starts to become embarrassing, and you're like, well, why would you just, if all cars are the same and there isn't much difference, why would you pay 3 times as much for the same ride? And it starts to become more embarrassing. And I can see how that's a challenge, as car makers are so much on the luxury, you know, train. So makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I drove to the office a couple of times from Amsterdam to Berlin. It's not that big of a drive. I mean, Americans, living in the US for 20 plus years give me the long drive kind of experience. And people were like, you came with your car? You own a car? And they look at me like kind of down on me. I'm like, shit,
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't. That's
Yeah.
that's the kind of feeling. So I agree with Rob. There is this feeling of like, oh, I shouldn't do this.
Uh,
People don't need it, and
they judge me. Yeah.
and I think yeah, it's like and um I think what's interesting, and this is something that we discuss internally quite a lot. So, I mean, the experience of mobility is going a long way away from the four wheels, right? Now there is the explosion of electric bikes, electric
Right.
vehicle. They all have a different proposition and a
Right.
different,
Flying
but
cars.
the
Yeah.
way you, yeah, exactly, yeah. So the way you experience those new mobility system, it's really interesting, because in the end of it, it's like they don't take the same space, they don't have
Right.
combustion, they don't use combustion engine. So how you put them together as well into those kind of mobility and city system, that's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
um, just one case in particular, I think one of the city in Europe that is doing really amazing. It's Utrecht. Utrecht has the largest bike port. It's not a garage; it's basically a port in the world.
Wow.
And they are out on really against the car maker, and they are going to the extent where they say, we don't care if you EV or not UEV, you take too much space. There is a work that we needed to do to create the EV infrastructure for you. No, just use bike.
Yeah.
And they actually are paying people to not buy a car, and to
Wow.
buy either a bike or an electric bike. So they subsidizing electric bikes. So I mean, that tell you what the future most likely
Yep.
look like.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's really
Yeah. A lot
fascinating.
of times
Yeah.
they say the future is here. You just got to look where to find it. companies like us,
Yeah.
we're run
Hmm.
by bots. Bots everywhere. We have bots for everything, and then you have other companies that, you know, still using old telephones with push buttons. And yeah, if you want to look at the future, sometimes it's here. You just got to know where to find it. Go to those cities and you can see the future for yourself. And I
Yeah.
agree. We think of time as static and that everybody's living in the same time, but a lot of us are in different bubbles living at different times, and it's kind of cool to think you can go forwards and backwards in time just by knowing where to go, what country, what city, what company. Yeah,
Yeah. I actually love that concept. So it's like living different time and different ecosystem wherever you go.
yeah,
That's really incredible because in the end of it, by comparison, if you think of, everybody in the financial market is basically saying India is the new China, which
right.
is most likely true.
Yeah,
But everybody in India is getting wealthier, and the first thing that they do is buy a
oh
car.
yeah,
And that car most likely will still have a combustion engine.
yeah,
But even in India, they were saying, "Well, hold on a minute. We
yeah,
don't want to end up like China. So why could we create more EV vehicles and all that?" And that's the role of the car maker. If you think of Mahindra was effectively one of the first sponsor of the Formula E that will substitute the Formula One series.
but
And having that kind of saying, sure, everybody will buy a car, but could we make them electric? It's kind of like, oh, that's a different choice than many other country in the past made, and there will be a lot less pollution, a lot less,
yeah,
you know, um, kind of a mobility, craziness if some of those decisions were taken sooner. So it it's definitely a different time in technology in different country, in different
yeah,
geolocation, which is really fascinating. So
yeah. You look at companies,
yeah,
the new car maker, of tomorrow, the Teslas. It's really like this R&D engine and this capital, you know, concentration. And why did it have to be just for cars? And it's
yeah,
just looking at it as a an R&D hub, and for applying technology to making life easier, um, versus just narrowing it to, well, it has to relate to you know a car. It can't be a bicycle. It can't. It's got to be a car. That doesn't really make sense. It makes sense to kind of broaden the
it
scope of
doesn't.
the
Yeah,
problem you're trying to solve, which is to transport people from point A to point B, however it makes sense. And then R&D efforts around that line. So yeah, cool how life is changing.
Well, it's interesting to think of. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think of cars as maybe like just another robot that becomes part of a
Exactly.
pastiche of robots,
yeah,
and that they're all drawing on the same
Yeah.
ecosystem
yeah,
that or that governments and individuals are using
Right.
separately. And that's really interesting too. That I hadn't thought about that as a way to kind of phase out combustion engines. That by changing the idea of what it means to own a car, or the relevance of owning a car, that can really have a huge impact. Because I think people in America at least seem to think of like upgrading to a electric vehicle. Like I have to buy this new
Yeah.
vehicle and I'm going to put it off. But if that's not the end goal, it's just like, well, I can instead take part of it in a subscription service
Right.
that lets me use this electric vehicle all the time. And if I really like it,
yeah,
I
Yeah.
can
Or
upgrade my
or
service
who
and get
knows? I mean,
a better
maybe
electric
just
vehicle.
cars in the future are just fancy escalators, right? We all use them. We all use an escalator. We don't own the escalators. We just get on them and they take us
Yeah.
from one.
I love. Do you see my escalator? It's better than yours. Yeah. No, but I actually love the idea. When I think of the wealthy of Munich or maybe the wealthy of Amsterdam, I guarantee you that a large percentage of those people, they have their toy in their garage, of course.
Uh-huh.
I mean, for for the Sunday ride or
Yeah.
for the car show, but they don't drive. They
Yeah.
they call it Uber. They go anywhere. They take a train. They bike. I mean, um I know personally the one of the guy in Amsterdam recently discovered a famous painting somewhere, and he become extremely wealthy. He's from a wealthy family to begin with, but he become extremely wealthy. He never owned a car in his entire life. Neither is interesting in owning one.
Right.
And he mentioned that one time he needed to go to a dinner and he wanted to, show off. He rent a Lambo and he show up at the dinner with the Lambo. And when they ask, "Is that yours?" They said, "No, absolutely no. I rented it," because it will be a shame to say, "Yeah, that's my Lambo."
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. So that changed completely the role. And 10 years ago, like, "Oh yeah, that's my car. Yeah, of course." And now it's like, absolutely no. I would be
No.
ashamed to
Yes.
even do such a thing.
Yes.
I did it for fun, just to come here and have fun with you guys. It's like, okay, that's a different story.
Yep.
So it's really, really, yeah, really interesting
Shifting
from
values.
from a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So
All right, guys. Well, I feel good about this
Yeah.
conversation we've had.
Great.
I hope you guys had fun.
I
very
gotta get
much
some
so.
work done.
Our time has come to
Oh
an
wait,
end,
it's
but
Friday. I don't have to get any work done. I can just reflect. I got some
yeah, I'm
reflecting
gonna go
to do.
self-analyze.
I gotta go. Yep.
No, but I mean, we should do this more often. I mean, I love to chat about any kind of things. I think for us in the future of myself and specifically Icon in Car, I think there's a lot more behind that goes beyond the car. Talk about bicycle and all the things. So it's really interesting. I think the transformation we discuss, it really is telling us, okay, what are you going to be
Yeah.
tomorrow? Because we work for OEMs and we work for car makers, and it's an extremely fascinating discussion to have. So to be part of that discussion for me is thrilling. So I mean, maybe next we should talk about something even different. So love to, yeah.
Sounds
But
great.
thank you so
Yeah,
much
I had this
for
whole list of questions that we didn't get to. So
yeah, but it will be really. I mean, it's been a thrilling experience, and love to do more. And I'm just grateful to have the opportunity. So
Awesome.
oh yeah, happy to have you, Guido. Great to see you again.
Alrighty.
And yeah, we'll do
Sounds
it again
great,
soon.
guys.
same. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Soon. Bye.
All right, thanks again for joining us on Invisible Machines. We're produced in partnership with UX Magazine. Be sure to follow UX Magazine wherever you listen to podcasts to subscribe. We are also a video podcast. We exist on the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. Special thanks to the marketing team at OneReach.ai and the team at UX Mag for all their help. Special shout out to Michael Litvinov, our video editor. Don't forget that if you would like to get a copy of Age of Invisible Machines, the book that I wrote along with Rob Wilson, you can do that just about anywhere you get a book. So find a copy. It's good stuff. It's been fun, and we will look forward to connecting again next week.